Okay. So about this chapter, let's talk about it. Metabolism and energy balance. Okay. So, uh, so this. Okay. So control of food intake is a really complex process, and obviously a lot of people have problems with this problem, or else, or this concept. And there, this is a really important chapter because myself included, have weight issues and stuff. So let's get talking about this. Okay. So there's two competing behavioral states: hunger, okay, and satiety, which is being full. But on top of that, there's actually cultural um, input and other sense, other sense of input in terms of when we eat, what we should eat, etc., etc. Okay. So eating and stuff for us is not just a physiological thing; it's also a social thing, which makes layers of complication on top of it. Okay. So so the glucostatic theory is hunger and satiety is measured by glucose, or the glucostatic theory, which is controlled by fat. Okay, so let's talk about what this is. Okay. Okay, so neuropeptide Y stimulates the hypothalamic feeding center. Okay, and that causes increase in food intake, which increases fat storage, which increases leptin secretion. Leptin turns around and inhibits neuropeptide Y, which means if you secrete leptin, then you will stop being hungry. Okay. Okay. So make sure you understand ghrelin. Okay. Neuropeptide Y. Um, Here we see orexins. You do need to know what CCK does, and that, okay, those four. Okay. Um, okay. So energy balance, energy input equals energy output. So the total body energy is energy stored plus energy intake plus energy output. Okay. If energy um, output is greater than energy intake, then will be a negative storage, so we'll burn calories. If there if there isn't, okay, so the total body energy is actually zero. So you whatever you use, whatever you take in, and whatever you take in, you don't use, you store. Okay. Okay. So most of the work that's done is transport mechanical or chemical work. Most of this work is unconscious. We're not actively doing it. Things like burning heat for burning sugar for heat. Okay. Cellular metabolism to repair tissues and stuff like that. We're not consciously doing it. Okay. Okay. Okay, so energy input is food, energy output is heat and work. Okay, roughly 50-50, depending on who it is. Okay, and what you're doing. We generally can't change heat, we can change work. Okay, one of the best ways, but not the only way, is direct calorimetry, which measures the amount of food that you're eating. Um, that's usually off by about 10%, because you don't eat, when you eat your food, you crap some of it out. So you get something like 10% loss of calories. Okay, indirect calorimetry measures oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide production, et cetera, and all of that is an estimate because when we breathe oxygen, we can still undergo anaerobic respiration. The carbon dioxide production is different whether you're burning fat and sugars and stuff like that. So these are all estimates. Okay. Okay, so many factors influence metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate is an individual's lowest metabolic rate. You can calculate that in class or in lab. Okay, so basal metabolic rate is basically what your metabolic rate is if you were lying on your couch all day and not moving. Okay. Certain factors influence metabolic rate, age and sex, the amount of lean muscle mass. The more lean muscle mass you have, the more higher basal metabolic rate is. Okay, activity level, diet and diet induced thermogenesis, like you eat, how spicy you eat, etc., etc. Okay, all right. Hormones, genetics, only energy intake and level of physical activity can be voluntarily changed. Okay, so strength training increases lean muscle mass, which increases additional energy usage. And okay, so fat is compact storage. So 3 levels of storage. First level, glucose. Glucose is very quick energy, but very inefficient in terms of space. It takes up a lot of room. It takes up a lot of weight per calorie, so it's not efficient. Okay, glucose is more efficient. Glycogen is more efficient. It's stored in the liver and skeletal muscles, but even more efficient than that is fat. Okay, fat is more than twice the energy content of the equivalent amount of carbohydrate or protein. Okay, but it's harder to access. It requires more enzymes. It requires more time to access, and it's slower. And it requires 100% requires oxygen. Okay. Okay. So 2 pathways: anabolic pathways, catabolic pathways. Okay. Ingested biomolecules have 3 fates: the energy to mechanical work. Okay. Movement, synthesis of growth and maintenance, repair, and then if these 2 are done and there's still more energy, then storage as glycogen and or fat. Okay. Okay. So nutrients are available for immediate use of plus. So this picture, make sure you understand everything that's going on in this picture, all 3 pools. Okay. If you understand this picture really well, you understand this chapter. Okay. Like what happens if there's excess glucose? Excess glucose gets made into fat, right? Turns into fat storage. Okay. 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 So brain metabolism is different than other metabolism. So brain only requires glucose or only uses glucose. Okay. Okay. Yeah. This. Okay. The fed state metabolism, you should definitely understand. So fed state, you want to store food, you want to make things. Okay. You want to create things and stuff like that. Okay. Okay. So fat store energy. So chylomicrons leave the intestine by the lymphatic vessels. These little, they're basically little balls of fat. They contain cholesterol, triglycerides, phospholipids, apolipoproteins, which then convert triglycerides to glycerol and fatty acids. The cholesterol is secreted as bile, and stuff like that. Okay, so this is how we so energy production. So let me see where fats come in. So fats, okay. Let me see this. Okay, this occurs in the cytoplasm. Okay, and you can see sugars can be sugars can be burned in the cytoplasm. This occurs in mitochondria, and therefore it requires oxygen. Okay, so getting the maximum amount of energy out of sugar requires oxygen. Burning fat and amino acids require oxygen. Okay, there are some fatty acids, some amino acids that you plug into pyruvate, but most of them actually plug into the citric acid cycle and require oxygen. So oxygen you need to maximize burning. Okay. Okay, so for this chart, you have to understand the difference between fast state and fasted state. Okay, what happens when you're full and what happens when you're hungry, basically. Okay. Okay. Synthesis. Okay. So we can absorb fat directly and store it, or we can make fat through making fatty acids, glycerol, using fatty acid synthase to make fatty acids. Okay, and you can make fat. Okay, new triglycerides. Okay. Okay, so plasma control predicts heart disease. So you should know what LDL versus HDL is. Okay. Okay. So every change, this is decrease, right? Every change dramatically decreases your chance for heart disease. Okay. Okay. So fasted state metabolism. Okay. So fasted state metabolism is when you need energy, when you need to burn what your stores. Okay. So glycogen is converted to glucose. Okay. Glycogen lysis, like breaking apart glycogen. We try to not do the animation of amino acids to make ATP, but when we need energy, we can. Okay, we break down lipids, we break down glycerol, the fatty acids. Okay, undergo beta oxidation to produce acetyl CoA. Okay, so fatty acids undergo beta oxidation. Beta is 2 carbon units, beta 2, to produce acetyl CoA, and we burn acetyl CoA in the citric acid cycle. But when we have too much acetyl-CoA, or you're burning fat, large amounts of fat, the acetyl-CoA can end up being turned ketones or keto acids, and that leads to ketoacidosis. Okay, so ketoacidosis is something that you see in diabetics because they can't uptake sugar. They end up burning more fat than they should. And when they burn more fat than they should, they end up in ketoacidosis. Okay. Okay. So, your liver produces energy production from glucose. Glucose is fed to the brain. Okay. Free fatty acids can be beta oxidized into acetyl-CoA and also have some ketone bodies. Ketone bodies can go to the brain and can serve for energy production when there's not enough glucose around in the brain. Okay. Glycogen lysis is just simply taking glycogen, cutting it one chunk at a time into glucose. Okay. Amino acids. Okay. Amino acids, the very important thing you have to do is you have to cut off the amino group. Okay, that process is called deatomation. Okay, and the organic acid. And the organic acid, you can take it through glycolysis or the citric acid cycle somewhere, and that usually plugs in somewhere in that chain. Okay, the ammonia must be converted to urea, and you end up peeing it out. Okay. Okay. Gluconeogenesis, glucose new genesis formation of. Okay, so we can actually make new glucose from either lactate or other amino acids into pyruvate, and then that process can go through gluconeogenesis and make glucose. Okay. Okay. Lipases, so lipolysis, so fat ripping apart, lysis is breaking apart. So when I take fat, this is a fatty acid, I'm going to chop them into two carbon blocks. The two carbon is an acetyl group, so attach it to acetyl, like that's the acetyl part of the CoA. So you take the acetyl group, attach it to CoA, and then you burn it in the electron transport chain and get tremendous amount of calories out of that. Okay. Okay, so homeostatic control metabolism. Beta cells secrete insulin, alpha cells secrete glucagon, the delta cells secrete somatostatin. Okay, so there's a T there that's missing. Okay. Okay, so fast state, passive state. You should understand what this is and how this works. Okay, so this is right before a meal. Right after the meal, the insulin levels shoot up, right, to get the sugar in the cells. Right after the meal, the glucagon shoots down because you no longer need to burn your own calories because you're just ingesting them. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So insulin in the fed state. Okay. You should be able to read this through and kind of figure out what's going on. Okay. Okay. Insulin promotes metabolism, so you should know what insulin does. Okay. Okay. So insulin, once you find insulin, it increases uh, GLUT4. GLUT4 transports more glucose, and that leads to change in cellular metabolism. Okay. Okay. So adipose and resting muscle, in the absence of insulin, there are no 4 receptors. In the fed state, insulin signals the cell to insert GLUT4, so allows glucose to enter the cell, which then allows um, more cellular metabolism to go on. Okay, this is especially true for skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle exercise also increases GLUT4. GLUT4 allows glucose to come in. Okay. 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 Um, okay. In the liver, this is slightly different. In the liver, in the fasted state, the hepatocyte makes glucose and transports it out of the blood using um, GLUT2 transporters. Remember, in the fasted state, you're doing the opposite. You need to release glucose into the bloodstream from the liver, and that's GLUT2. Okay, so GLUT2 transports glucose out to the bloodstream. Okay, and when there's insulin, that is blocked. Okay, and it reverses. Okay, and glucose enters the cell. Okay. 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 Um, so glucagon. Glucagon is dominant in fasted state. It is basically the antagonist of insulin. Um, its job is to prevent hypoglycemia, too low blood sugar. Okay. Um, okay. So plasma glucose. Um, so this is um, increasing uh, plasma glucose or increasing plasma amino acids, which means when there's increase in uh, amino acids in the plasma, that means there's you're breaking down protein a lot. So that tells the alpha cells in the pancreas to increase glucagon, which then releases sugar into the bloodstream, which increases plasma glucose. Okay. Okay. Diabetes, mellitus. Okay. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is insulin deficiency from autoimmune disease, the destruction of beta cells. So you are not creating any insulin. Type 1 diabetes is also known as juvenile diabetes. You see it more in juveniles. Okay. Type 2 diabetes is insulin resistant diabetes. Okay. Make sure you're able to distinguish between the two. Okay. So diagnosing diabetes, blood glucose after 8 hours of fasting. So I think we've changed these standards a little bit now, but basically it should be about 100 milligrams per deciliter is definition of diabetes. Okay, or the glucose tolerance test after 2 hours. So glucose tolerance test means you take up a huge bolus of glucose and you see how long that it takes to disappear. Okay, so here you see a normal subject after one bolus of glucose goes up right past 125 and stuff, but that lasts for less than an hour. By definition, if you're diabetic, that bolus has to last for after 2 hours, still over 200 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, so 200 milligrams per deciliter after 2 hours. Technically, after 2 hours, it should already return to normal. Okay. Okay. Type 1 diabetics are prone to ketoacidosis. Okay. Ketoacidosis. So your body's not making insulin. So the cells go into fast state metabolism. Okay. So protein metabolism, fat metabolism, glucose metabolism. Okay. So you have glucose in your blood, you just don't have the insulin to make that use. Okay, so you go into hyperglycemia, too much glucose in the blood. Okay, your brain metabolism doesn't realize that you have glucose in the blood, so it makes you feel hungry. So polyphagia. Okay, because you have glucose in your urine, so glucosuria, and that causes so glucose leaks in the urine. Glucose attracts water into your urine. So that pulls in the water into your urine. So you pee out more. Dehydration, thirst, and excessive drinking, polydipsia. Again, your osmolarity in your blood is high, and that's how your brain triggers thirst. So it makes you thirsty. Okay. And last but not least, metabolic acidosis. You end up burning fat instead of sugar, and that produces keto acids. Too much keto acids leads to metabolic acidosis. Okay. So it's all right here. Okay. Okay, so diabetics also have elevated insulin levels. So instead of having no insulin, they have elevated insulin. They're just not responding to the insulin. Okay, so insulin resistant first therapy, exercise and weight loss. Exercise and weight loss, fat cells actually inhibit insulin. Okay, from functioning well, and therefore weight loss. Exercise increases sugar uptake independent of insulin, which keeps your blood sugar levels lower. Okay, all right. Next thing. Okay, drugs stimulate beta secretion of insulin, so even crank up to a higher level. Slow the digestion or absorption of carbohydrates, especially simple carbohydrates. Okay, inhibit the pancreatic glucose output, so prevents the liver from releasing glucose. Okay, make target tissues more sensitive, responses to insulin. That should be obvious. Promote glucose excretion, so you pee out. If you if you pee out glucose, then that's one way of getting rid of the glucose. Okay. Right. Okay, so metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a combination of type 2 diabetes, obesity, atherosclerosis, and high blood pressure. Okay, so having three of these. Okay, so metabolism, regulation of metabolism is really not understood well. There's thyroid hormone effects, there's cortisol effects, growth hormone, epinephrine. Okay, so human control body temperature. So there's different ways we can gain and lose heat. So how we gain heat, internal heat production, that's the major one. Okay, burning sugar, movement, all of that generates heat. Okay, external heat input, radiant heat gain. Okay, basking in the sun, conductive heat gain, is like touching a hot material or something like that, warming up. Okay, and then conductive heat loss, radiant heat loss. Okay, we radiate heat. We lose heat when we touch cold stuff. Okay, convective heat loss, like when wind blows past us, they take some heat away with it. And last but not least, evaporative heat loss. So when we evaporate, we cool down. Okay. So evaporation, conduction is physically touching things, and then convection is wind transfer. Okay. Okay. So we do best at this 24 to 30 degree zone. Above the thermonuclear zone, we must compensate for heat gain. Below the zone, we must compensate for heat loss. Okay. So you guys understand that? Okay. So movement and metabolism produce heat. I'm sure you guys know that already. Normal metabolic pathways require a large amount of breakdown of stuff, so it produces heat. Voluntary movement of muscle generates heat. Okay. So regulate heat production, shivering thermogenesis. So when you shiver, the purpose of shivering is to generate heat. Okay. Non-shivering thermogenesis, you can burn sugar or burn fat just for purposes of generating heat. Okay. Okay. This I'm sure you guys know already. Okay. 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 The physiological regulation of thermostats. So circadian rhythm, you're warmer at night than you are during the day. The menstrual cycle variations. There are tiny females when they're ovulating are slightly hotter, and therefore you can actually measure it. They spike a little bit. So if you have a very sensitive thermometer, you can measure when you're ovulating because your temperature will spike. Okay, so postmenopausal hot flashes. Okay, but that spike is like 0.1 degrees. It's not like noticeable unless you carefully measure it. Okay. All right. So pathological conditions: heat exhaustion, heat stroke, malignant hypothermia. That's usually a reaction to certain drugs. Okay. All right, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. See you guys in class soon.